There you go. Okay, welcome everyone to the second of 3 public forums for affordable housing in Morris. Tonight, we're going to talk about the specific goals and strategies that are being proposed to address the Morris housing needs. We will have some polling questions that will appear on the screen. It's a really nice way to do it. Very simple. Just click on the answer you want, and it gets loaded. And it's we don't know who's voting or how they're voting, but we'll get your feedback. And we're also going to look at what affordable housing looks like in the neighboring small towns. And you might be surprised at how other towns have been doing this. And how does the Morris housing compare to those of the neighboring towns in Northwest Connecticut? And finally, what are the next steps in the development process and the housing plan? And I think we have, as far as the Housing Plan Steering Committee, myself, Tom White, First Selectman. We have Kristen Davila, Director of Community Activities, Veronica Florio, Planning and Zoning Commission, Ben Pletsky, the Economic Development Commission Chair, Ben Solnit from the Morris Land Trust, he's the president of the Morris Land Trust, and Connie Trolley from the Inland Wetlands Commission and Bantam Lake Protective Association. Also with us is Jocelyn Eyre. She's the consulting assistant with the planning process from the Northwest COG. Jocelyn?
Yeah, all right. So sorry, I was muted. For those of you that weren't here with us last time, we're just going to review a couple things about why the town is creating an affordable housing plan. What do we mean by that? And what are the needs that the housing needs that Morris has before we launch into some of the strategies and goals that the Morris Housing Plan Steering Committee has been talking about, and getting your feedback on that. Again, briefly, there is new state legislation that requires every town in Connecticut to have an affordable housing plan and to adopt it. And the goal is really, again, to sort of go through a proactive planning process to lay out a strategy for meeting your town's housing needs for both existing and future residents and workers. So that's what the town is in the process of doing right now. And again, just as a reminder, if you were here last time, or if you were not, how we're defining affordable housing. So it is defined as housing that costs less than 30% of the income of a household earning 80% of the area median income or less. And so on your screen on the right there are those numbers. They are updated every year and by family size. And so, for example, if you were a family of 4 people and you made $82,000, you would qualify to live in what could be defined as affordable housing. In addition, the state and others want to be sure that the housing is overseen to make sure that it stays affordable to income eligible families and is monitored by some program or agency to ensure affordability longer term. So that's how we're defining affordable housing. Currently, according to the State Department of Housing, Morris has 31 units of affordable housing that meets that definition, which is 2.36% of your total housing stock. And you can see here on this slide, again, kind of where some of your neighboring towns are in terms of how many units of affordable housing they have and what percentage of their housing stock is affordable. And some of your neighboring towns are also currently developing affordable housing plans, including Cornwall, Washington, and Warren. So at the last community-wide forum in March, we spent quite a bit of time talking about what the data tells us about Morris's housing needs. And I'm just going to summarize that quickly. But first, I wanted to test out the polling feature. And so I'm going to ask you a few questions that we did cover at the last meeting. And let me launch that. So the questions are, seeing if you can remember from the last meeting, how many Morris households report paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs? Technically, that is the definition of being housing cost burdened, which is something that we look at when we're trying to determine the need for affordable housing in a town. And the second question is, how much do you think sales prices increased in Morris in the last 5 years? All right, I'm gonna close the polling. If anyone else wants to jump in there before I close it. Looks like we got 11 of 14 of you have voted. Oh, 12 of 14. All right. Okay, so I think you can see the results here. The correct answer of how many Morris households are housing cost burdened is 258 households. So those 4 of you that voted for that got it right. And over the last 5 years, just the last 5 years, the sales price in Morris, the median sales price, has increased by $87,000. So those of you that voted for that got that one right. So again, just briefly summarizing Morris's housing needs from the last meeting before we jump into how we're going to try to meet those housing needs. Morris's housing stock, again, like many other towns in Northwest Connecticut, is not very diverse. 91% of Morris's housing is single family detached homes, which is the most expensive type of home to own and maintain. And a majority of those have 3+ bedrooms, making them more expensive and not as appropriate for folks who might want to downsize. There is a lack of rental housing options in Morris. Only 10% of Morris homes are occupied by renters versus 30% statewide. And many rentals in Morris are very expensive, especially those around the lake, for example, or the seasonal rentals. There are very limited housing options that are affordable for many people who work in town. There is some senior housing, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but not as much as is needed, and there's very few downsizing options. As we discussed, Morris currently has 31 affordable homes, which is just 2% of its housing stock, and 258 Morris households are report being housing cost burdened. So that's just, again, a summary of what the needs are that these goals and strategies that we're going to talk about next are trying to address. So the next few slides, we're going to run through these ideas and get your feedback using the polling questions. If anybody is having trouble, it looked like most people could vote using the polling feature. If you're having any trouble, feel free to unmute yourself and let us know, or raise your hand or type into the chat box. So the Morris Housing Plan Steering Committee, again, has been talking about goals and strategies. Some of the goals that have been discussed are creating first-time home buyer options, encouraging the development of downsizing options, supporting the development of rental options for seniors and young people, young families, and helping to keep seniors in their homes. And in terms of a potential unit goal, the discussion has been for a unit goal of 25 new affordable housing units over the next 5 years. So I'm gonna launch the next poll, which is to get your feedback on those. The questions are, do you support these 4 overarching goals for the housing plan? And do you support the unit goal of 25 new housing units over the next, new affordable housing units over the next 5 years? All right, I'm going to end polling, share the results. So everyone said that they supported the overarching goals, and 67% of you said yes. In terms of 25 new units over the next 5 years. 2 of you said you thought it should be higher, and 2 of you said you thought it should be lower. All right, I'm trying to write down the results too quickly. All right, so next we're gonna get into some specific ideas on strategies for meeting those goals, and again, get your feedback. So the first overarching goal is trying to help create some first-time home buyer options. You'll see here on the right side of your screen are a couple first-time home buyer homes that the Litchfield Housing Trust created. So some of the possible strategies that the steering committee has discussed: encouraging private giving of land or funding to a Morris Housing Trust, if one were formed. So that's one possible strategy, is to form a local housing trust, like, for example, Litchfield, Goshen, Washington, all have local land trusts, or sorry, local housing trusts that can do this kind of work. So one of the things that we're trying to do is seeing whether there are residents in Morris that would be interested in creating a Morris Housing Trust. Another strategy being considered is potentially working with existing land conservation organizations like the Morris Land Trust and White Memorial to see if there are smaller parcels with low conservation value that could be provided to a Morris Housing Trust to be used to create a first-time home buyer opportunity. And finally, potentially creating a town or privately funded community revolving loan fund to provide down payment assistance to potential homeowners seeking to buy in Morris. That is something, for example, that the town of Washington has, allowing them to provide some down payment assistance to folks who want to buy homes in Washington. So I'm going to launch the polling questions on this. So the questions are, would you support a nonprofit housing trust being formed in Morris? Again, that would be not a town entity, but a nonprofit made up of town residents, similar in you know, similar to a land trust only focused on housing. Second is, would you consider volunteering to be on the board of a Morris Housing Trust if it's formed? Again, as Tom mentioned, we won't know how you vote on this, so we won't hold you to it necessarily. We just want to see if folks would be interested. And the final question is, would you support creating a town-funded community revolving loan fund for down payment assistance? All right, I think most people have voted. I'm gonna end polling, share results. So 86% said yes to the formation of a housing trust. To need more information. Wow, great. 9 people said they would consider volunteering. That's amazing. That's terrific. And then the revolving loan fund, 64% said yes. 14% said no, and 21% said not sure. And again, you know, many of these things, many of these strategies, were they to move forward, would have another, at least 1 or 2 more rounds of public input and public debate before they happen. But we're just trying to gauge what people might be interested in terms of possible strategies. So, all right, so that is first time home buyer strategies. The second overarching goal is trying to create downsizing options. So that would be, again, I mentioned that most homes in Morris are 3+ bedrooms. A lot of them aren't very accessible, and many are older on larger lots, which are kind of more difficult to maintain. So in order to create some different housing options, some possible strategies would be allowing duplexes or 2-family homes by zoning, allowing townhouse style, for example, up to 4 units attached in the commercial and industrial districts in Morris, and or allowing the conversion of existing larger homes to 2 to 4 units. And before I move to letting you vote on those or polling you on those possible strategies, again, these are all zoning strategies. So if there was enough interest in exploring the possibility of them, and you know, the housing plan steering committee decides to put them in the draft plan, it would of course go to the Planning and Zoning Commission for their full consideration and a public hearing. But and then just to show you kind of where the commercial industrial zones are, in case you don't know, because those are the zones in which maybe, again, up to 4 units attached could be considered, for example. So if you look here, the zones, areas shown in purple are the commercial and industrial zones. This is your zoning map. All right, so I'm gonna launch the polling questions about that. Would you support allowing 2-family or duplex homes where soils and septic capacity allows? Would you support allowing townhouse style up to 4 units attached in commercial industrial districts? Would you support allowing the conversion of existing larger homes to 2 to 3 units? right, has everybody? All right, I'm gonna end polling. So 69% say yes. To potentially allowing duplexes or two families. 69% say yes to potentially allowing townhouse style units in commercial industrial districts. And 62% said yes to allowing conversion. 31% said no, and 1 said not sure. All right. You know, we are interested, the steering committee is interested if other people have other ideas or obviously any questions about any of these strategies. So again, you should feel free, if you have other ideas or you want to ask questions, you can go ahead and do that, or type a question or idea into the chat box, and we'll also have time at the end of the presentation part to get more ideas or questions from you. So continuing with possible downsizing options, one of the things that is often talked about as an option is an accessory apartment. And the graphic down kind of at the bottom of this slide shows all the different ways that you can have an accessory apartment. It could be in a detached, separate, smaller unit, or it could be attached. It could be on the second floor of your home. It could be over a garage. It could be in a lower level. There's lots of different options for accessory apartments. This graphic on the right-hand side of your screen shows, kind of a life cycle of, if you have an accessory apartment, you might start out as a young family and you rent the accessory apartment to another young couple, and you benefit from having the income of that apartment. And then maybe your parents are older and you want to keep an eye on them, so they live in your accessory apartment when your kids are a little older. And then maybe you have a kid coming home from college, and that older child lives in the accessory apartment for a while. And then maybe you're older and you don't need as much space, so you live in the accessory apartment and you rent the primary home to another young family. So anyway, accessory apartments can create some additional options as well. They're typically not restricted affordable housing, but sometimes they can be affordable by their nature because they do have to be smaller in size than the primary unit. So some possible strategies would be, again, amending the town's zoning regulations to, for example, allow an attached accessory apartment without requiring a public hearing, to allow 2 accessory apartments, 1 attached and 1 detached. This is something the town of Roxbury recently did. And removing the requirement that either the primary home or the apartment be occupied by the property owner. Those things could create some more flexibility within your zoning regulations to potentially create some more accessory apartments. So here's your polling questions about accessory apartments. Would you support allowing up to 2 accessory apartments per parcel, basically? So, And that would be 1 attached and 1 detached. And would you support removing the requirement that either the primary home or the apartment be occupied by the property owner? All right. All right, so 40% of you said yes. To allowing up to 2, 33% said no, and 27% said not sure. Removing the owner occupancy requirement, 40% said yes, 47% said no, and 13% said not sure. All right. At the last meeting, Jim talked about the Morris Housing Authority. And I'm just bringing this slide back up here because we're going to talk about Eldridge in a second. Again, if you weren't there last time, you know, Eldridge Senior Housing in Morris has 20 units. There are typically about 20 seniors on the waiting list for that at any given time. And sometimes folks have to wait between 3 and 4 years to get a unit there. And this also lists the current board members on the Morris Housing Authority. So in terms of possible strategies for creating some more rental options for seniors and young people, some of the possible strategies that the Housing Plan Steering Committee have been talking about are supporting the creation of additional housing units at Eldridge Senior Housing by the Morris Housing Authority, and potentially assisting the Housing Authority to build its capacity and resources to address housing needs, such as helping get the word out to residents who might like to join the board or donate land or funding to the Housing Authority. So I will launch the polling questions about that. And they are, do you support the idea of the Morris Housing Authority building additional affordable rental units at Eldridge? And would you be interested in serving on the board of the Morris Housing Authority at some point? All right. So everyone said yes to supporting the idea of additional units at Eldridge. And 5 people said they'd be interested in potentially serving on the board at some point. Great. All right, the final overarching goal that has been discussed is helping to keep seniors in their homes, and some of the strategies that the committee has been talking about in order to do that. Ensuring that the town's zoning regulations allow residents to add wheelchair ramps or make other modifications to their home without needing a special permit or a variance. Promoting energy efficiency programs. As we know, heating and cooling our homes is sometimes very expensive. And when you're on a limited, when you have a limited income, anything that can be done to lower those costs is probably helpful. Consider restoring the town's housing rehabilitation loan program that used to provide funding and technical assistance for accessibility modifications or other needed upgrades for income eligible homeowners. And increasing awareness that there is a municipal agent at the Morris Senior Center who can assist seniors with meeting their transportation, food, and social needs. I don't have any polling questions on these, but if people have questions, again, feel free to raise your hand or, type a question into the chat box. The polling questions I have are about more about how these strategies could be implemented, all the strategies under all 4 goals. And one of the ideas for making sure that whatever strategies go into the final housing plan get implemented would be to form a town housing committee to oversee implementation of the housing plan and to move those strategies forward. Also, some towns have a town housing fund or that can help to support some of these initiatives. And there is a conveyance fee that is already collected by the town. Some other towns have decided to allocate a portion of that conveyance fee that's already collected to some kind of housing fund or acquisition fund. So that's just another idea about how you could potentially have some mechanisms in place to make sure that you can implement your housing plan. So I believe the next polling questions, which you should see now. Do you think the town should form a town housing committee to oversee implementation of the housing plan once it's adopted? And if so, would you be interested in volunteering on such a committee? And the third one is, would you support a town ordinance to allocate a portion of that conveyance fee that's already being collected to create a town housing fund to support the town's affordable housing initiatives going forward? All right. So yes to creating a town housing committee. 6 of you said you'd potentially be interested in volunteering, which is terrific.
Jocelyn, could you share those results on the screen?
Sorry, I thought I was doing that. There you go. And in terms of the town ordinance about the conveyance fees, 80% of folks said yes. And 20% or 3 of you also said you weren't sure because you needed more information. All right. All right, I guess before the next thing we have on our list of things to do is to show you what affordable housing looks like in some of the neighboring towns. I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute. Are there any questions or comments on any of those goals or strategies that people wanna make before we move into showing you what it looks like in some of the other towns? don't see any chats or any raised hands. So we are gonna show you, and we're gonna show you a quick video that again, we'll show you what affordable housing looks like in 5 neighboring towns. And somebody stop me if you can't hear it, but you should be able
to. The Northwest Council of Governments did a study of all the towns in their region. In Washington, there's over 1,000 people who commute here to work.
People are moving away because really it doesn't make sense to live here. It's too expensive. And we're not going to change food prices. We're not going to change the gasoline prices. We can very reasonably provide lower cost housing.
It's been clear over the past 10 years that there's a much greater need for rental housing than we supposed.
I think the average age is something like 60, and we need to attract young families or the town will die.
The state projections are, in 20 years, by 2040, the population is going to diminish by about 22% to 2,400 people. And the population right now is about 3,500.
People need to understand that in order to have a vibrant community, one needs to have a good variety of economic incomes in it. And we need to take care of the nurses and healthcare workers, etc.
The affordable rental housing is really the entry point for a lot of these young families. But it's also a place where kids who grew up here can come back and establish themselves. The fact is that the people who move here are doing the work that otherwise they might have to drive an hour to get here. And that's essential for the town. So it benefits the town and it benefits...
Yeah, and they're paying rent. They pay it not more than a third of their income, but that's the way you can live nowadays. You can't pay more than a third of your income.
Where are we going? I mean, because this is essentially becoming, not literally, but figuratively, it's a gated community. The population here is going to drop, as I said. The strain that's going to put on local government, as they're having difficulty finding volunteers now for the fire department, EMTs.
When I was looking out, I was watching people walk out to talk, go back to their homes, check their mailboxes. They tend to look out for each other. Kent Affordable Housing built this, South Common. It opened in 2003 with 24 units. We have a range of people from a newborn who was arrived just after the family arrived to live here, up to elderly, and they work all over town. Some of them are retired. The 4 acres here, they belong to the town. It's not on the road. The entry road was built. It wasn't doing anything but sitting here.
People who've lived here at Cougaman have moved on to the parcel program, been able to move into homeownership. Some have moved to Bonnybrook as they got older and needed a 1-story house. We've had a couple of high school valedictorians here. We've had members of the fire department. We've had people who work in the service trades. There are people who work as school staff. About as random as any other slice of Cornwall.
The new unit in the back has 2 2-bedroom and 2 3-bedroom units. Included in the folks who live there are some essential workers. There's teachers, there's a school bus driver, there are folks who work in retail, there's someone who works at Laban's, there's someone who works at one of the restaurants. We are really filling a need, I think, very much in the community. And many of those people would have to live, 45 an hour away.
At our town center rentals, we have people that are in the 20% of AMI, the 50% bracket, the 80% bracket, and then we have some unrestricted units. Department of Housing feels it's really important to have a variety of different income levels. The types of people that are in our rental units are everybody from teachers to some landscapers to a chef. Generally speaking, they're very much members of the community and have been members of the community for a long time. and they just need a little bit of assistance.
The moment I found out that I was going to be able to get the apartment at 4 Shepherd Road, it's a 1-level apartment. I really needed to be able to get into a space where I didn't have to do stairs, and it was much easier for me to move. I had a lot of back issues. I really don't have the words to express how much they have helped me and how much I appreciate it. They were really able to work with me as far as how much I was making and what I could pay, and they were able to get my son and I into one of the apartments.
The 2 houses here, brand new. The farmhouse, we totally renovated. Everything in it is new. Windows, roof, all new mechanicals. The way we set this up is we own the land underneath this, and then we do a 99-year lease. We are responsible for, when the properties are resold, to see that they are resold to people meeting those same area median income levels. The ideal thing would be to find other houses like this that we could take the land and subdivide. But right now, the cheapest house in Washington is about $549,000. Typically, there's around 70 to 80 houses on the market. Right now, there's 24.
Where we are right now was built in the 1980s. It was very controversial. There were stinging letters written to the paper. It was not at all certain that people would be happy with it. In time, and it didn't take very long, it was understood to be essential and respected and enjoyed. Our small towns are not asked to pay for construction or operation of affordable housing. Therefore, property taxes in our towns do not increase by adding these types of housing opportunities. Construction funding comes primarily through the Connecticut Department of Housing, and we're very grateful for their essential partnership in creating new affordable housing options here. Our property managers also carefully vet all applicants who wish to live here, including income and background checks. Most applicants have close ties to the town already. They're moving to be closer to work or family. The professional property managers we hire to manage day-to-day operations, like Tammy here at Sarum Village, are terrific.
And the other thing that I think is very important as grandmother is that we've also brought some children to school.
There are solar panels at Stewart Farm on 8 of the 13 units. The first summer, their electric bills were $9.12 a month because the sun was out beautifully. I've given you all the upsides. The downside is there's not enough because it takes 5 years to build a complex like this.
The good part is there are good people like Jocelyn and Maggie Cooley, who I work with up in Cornwall, and lots of other people, the Bacharachs over in Kent. There are just lots of dedicated people that, put not just their financial resources, but, their time, which is more precious than anything, into, meeting these needs.
The Cornwall Housing Corporation has benefited from the generosity of people in town, from the Cougamans who gave the money that permitted the purchase of this lot 10 years ago when we had to suddenly come up with the money to buy the lot on which Bonnybrook stands. People were hugely supportive.
We received a donation of another 4-acre parcel here in town, so we're hoping to move forward on another project fairly soon. Abraham Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. And so the public sentiment has got to be accepting, here's the vision, after we've had town forums and discussions, all of you have had input, that we've got to implement, this plan that we've come up with to try and reach the goals that we set.
If you want to be able to go out to eat and have somebody wait your table, that person needs a place to live.
The way that affordable housing benefits a town like Salisbury is that it brings fresh life into the town.
I hope that the video will show people sort of the banality of affordable housing in our towns.
It's a real benefit to the town, but to the whole region. And every town needs it.
It's not charity. It's an investment. That's my top headline line.
Negative voices are usually louder than positive ones. If your town is currently creating an affordable housing plan, they need your participation now.
All right, so we just have a few more slides to show you how Morris's housing needs compare very briefly to some of the other towns in Northwest Connecticut, and then what the next steps are in the housing plan process. And then again, if you have other questions, comments, ideas, that would be great. But I'll just, unless I see any questions or see anybody else raising their hand, I will just keep running through these slides. We did at the Northwest Hills Council of Governments a regional housing needs assessment that does compare a bunch of housing related data between our 21 member towns, including Morris. And so I'm just going to run through just a few of the findings from that study. But if you are interested in seeing the full study, it is on the COGS website. You know, it does compare a bunch of data points, but we'll just talk about a few of them briefly. Again, we did talk about the fact that there are 258 Morris households that are paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs. Region-wide, there's over 10,000 households that are, again, paying unaffordable mortgage and or rent prices currently. No shock to most of us, home sales prices have been rising over the last 5 years. Again, at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about how the median sales price over the last 5 years in Morris has gone up by over $87,000. The average sales price in 2020 in Morris was $456,000. Again, those prices have been rising obviously quicker than anybody's salaries or incomes have been rising. And also access to ownership in terms of allowing folks who rent in your town to someday become owners. If you were the median income renter household in Litchfield County, you'd be earning about $41,000 a year, and you could afford a home costing somewhere around $115,500. So this chart just shows the gap between that, what the median renter household could afford and your median priced home in 2020. So you can see in Morris, for example, the median renter household would have to somehow come up with $264,000 more than they could afford in order to purchase the median priced home in Morris. So it's a pretty huge gap really in every town in Litchfield County. And one of the other pieces of data that we looked at during the study was that almost half of young adults ages 19 to 34 in Litchfield County are living in a parent's home. And again, that's probably likely because they can't find a place to rent or something's unaffordable or they can't afford to purchase a home. So So again, those are just a few data points where you can see how Morris's housing stock and affordability compares to some of the neighboring towns in the region. And this is really the last slide, just kind of letting you know where we are in the process of developing the housing plan. We did the Morris Housing Needs Assessment, presented that and the resident input survey at the last public forum, which was on March 24th. And then the steering committee moved forward to develop some possible goals and strategies, which are the ones that you heard about tonight, and gave us some feedback on. The next step will be drafting the housing plan itself with some of those goals and strategies in it, as well as the data on housing needs. And then hopefully, I think July or August, holding another community forum to get input on that draft plan. And we were just talking at the, before the meeting started, as people were joining, about trying to have that potentially in person, maybe outside this summer. And then once that there is a final housing plan, it will go through an adoption process to be adopted by the town. So that is where we are in the process. Again, we're happy to get any other questions, feedback, ideas from any of you. I'll just stop sharing about any of this. We do obviously thank everybody for their time being here tonight. Does anybody have any questions, comments, possible strategies that you would want to see included in a housing plan? Everyone's quiet tonight, Tom. Everyone wants to go back outside and enjoy the beautiful weather. I don't blame you.
Well, seeing no questions, what would you like to do?
Well, I think we should just stay here and stare at each other for another 10 minutes. No, I mean, again, I just thank everybody for their time tonight, and hopefully you'll be able to come to the next community forum where we present the draft housing plan. And if you do have any other thoughts, questions, or ideas, you know where Tom works. You can go visit him or email him with any thoughts or questions you have.
Definitely.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to post that video on the website if possible.
Yep, I will get that to you.
Yes, thank you, Jocelyn.
Oh.
Very nice presentation, Jocelyn. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.